Just because something is different doesn't make it wrong. If you add 2 and 2 and get anything other than 4, yeah, that's wrong. But if you like strawberry ice cream and your best friend prefers mint chocolate chip, that doesn't make the friend wrong, just different. Think of the English language like ice cream. There are many different flavors. Unfortunately, the tools used to assess English speech and language don't always take these differences into account, and it's having a serious impact, particularly on Black and African American children. So how do we solve this problem, and what can be done? Well, welcome to the Things You Didn't Know podcast. Joining me today is Dr. Megan-Brette Hamilton. She is a speech, language, and hearing science professor at Auburn University, a pioneer in reframing the way research and clinical communities talk about dialectical variation, and a fellow podcaster, the host of the Honeybee Connection podcast. Megan-Brette, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So we have a lot to unpack here in the next few minutes. I want to go ahead and dive in head first. I talked about in the introduction this concept of flavors of a language, and I want to make sure our listeners have a good understanding of what we're talking about. So kind of explain your work in this concept of flavors of language.
Yeah, so it's funny. I don't give credit for coming up with the whole concept flavors of English. I actually give credit to Eric Zollers, one of my most amazing best friend's husbands. So what happened was I was trying to explain to him what I was doing for my dissertation. This was years ago. And I was trying to explain, all these different ways that people speak English. And he was trying to wrap his head around it too, because it's hard for people to wrap their head around the different ways you can speak the same language. And to be perfectly honest, the different correct ways you can speak the same language. So when I told him that, he was thinking about the nurses at his hospital that he worked at. And he was like, oh, so it's like their flavor, their flavor of English. And I said, yes. If that's what works for you, their flavor of English. And then I just took it from there, and I started to realize that it was a nice metaphor to use, because when you think of flavors of, and I like to go with ice cream just because I like ice cream. If you think of flavors of ice cream, it's easy to wrap your head to be like, okay, good, they're all ice cream. Got it. They're all ice cream. But there's so many different flavors, and there's no hierarchy. There's no hierarchy to ice cream flavors. It's you like mint chocolate chip, or you like vanilla, or you like strawberry, you like pistachio, whatever. And there's no hierarchy there. So when I talk about different flavors of English, I'm really talking about all of the different ways that we speak the same language. And if you want to be more formal, linguists call this dialect or language variations. And they're all dialects. They're all language variations. Not one is the right way to speak English and all the rest are, lower than that.
Right. Well, and a lot of your work that you've talked about, and when you go and do these discussions and conferences that you have a lot of times with teachers and speech language pathologists, you talk and center a lot of your work around cultural humility and cultural competence. How does that play into this discussion of how different people speak?
Yeah, so it's funny. Our field, and probably other fields, so when I say our field, speech language pathology, audiology, so communication sciences and disorders, we were really heavy on this cultural competence for a while, right? Cultural competence meaning, do you have the skill set to provide culturally responsive practices to your clients, right? So do you have the awareness? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the attitude? Those are the 4 components we always talk about for cultural competence. Do you have that so that you can accurately assess, diagnose, and treat and have a positive relationship with clients who are from a different background than yourself, right? So that's like cultural competence. But then people start to say, no, it's not about cultural competence, it's about cultural humility. We need to learn to look within ourselves and to look at our own biases and to look at, our own prejudices and attitudes and stereotypes. So there's been this really interesting shift where people are like, no, we'll never be culturally competent. No one will ever be there. And I'm like, that's true. It's not a destination. It's actually a journey. And nothing's wrong with trying to stay on that journey. But the cultural humility part for me, I don't think it replaces the cultural competence. I think it's actually the predecessor for me, right? So for me, the predecessor is cultural humility, which is that internal work that you do as a person. I just looked at that person really awkwardly, or I just judged that mother who walked in here. Why did I do that? Why do I do that? Why do I judge people who talk like this? And why do I think they're less intelligent than I am? How come when someone says axe, I think something like they're not so smart? And you need to do that inner work. And you need to start realizing, like, what is it that got me here that made me think X, Y, and Z about this group of people, or X, Y, and Z about, this concept. So that's the cultural humility. And one way I like to describe it is cultural humility to me is like the heart, like really taking a good look at yourself and being like, ooh, this isn't pretty, but I gotta do it. I gotta do that work. And I think anyone can do that. I don't care what field you're in. Anyone, I don't care. To be honest, just any person can do that. But the cultural competence part for me is the competency, right? Now, can you take those skills that you learned? You need to take that cultural humility, that depth examination you did on yourself, and you need to apply that to attitudes, skills, knowledge, understanding the differences in cultures across a lot of different things, not just language, but you know, um, ideas of disability, how we take care of our young ones, how we take care of our older ones. Lots of different concepts of cultural competence that you need to think about.
So I want to dig in on that a little bit. I feel like the cultural humility piece is a very internal, like as I notice myself doing X, Y, and Z, assessing and evaluating that. And I think in the academy and at universities, we have this ability within classroom settings to really kind of dig in on the competency piece of, okay, I thought this, how do I, and it creates this opportunity for those discussions for someone that's already out in the field that may not have those places or spaces that may be set up more to allow for that. How does someone, maybe a practitioner listening, what's their next step in being able to kind of take that step past humility to start becoming more competent to better serve their clients?
So, taking that step past humility. So, first of all, I do think it's tricky to live in your own world and not get outside of it to see how others are living, right? And I say tricky, meaning it's actually not that hard, but people just don't want to do it, right? Like you can listen to radio stations that are geared towards a certain audience and learn about, say, the African American community, right? The Black community. You can turn to a certain radio station and learn about the Southern white community, right? There's a lot of things out there, but we choose to kind of just stay in our comfort zone and what we want to hear. So I think one of the things is actually exposing yourself intentionally, exposing yourself to the different cultural backgrounds of people that are literally just surrounding you, right? Watch different TV shows, talk to people if you don't know anyone. And I will admit, in this day and age, there are, I guess, still some people who don't know people who don't look like them or sound like them. But if you're one of those people, then you can take some baby steps, right? And you can go ahead and watch a TV show by yourself, learn from it, realize where, oh, shoot, I didn't know it was like that. Oh, I didn't know. They talk like that? Oh, I get it. Read a book, right? And then ask the questions. As you're gathering, ask the questions and don't be afraid to offend. I think one of the biggest issues we have nowadays is that people know the questions they have to ask. That people know the questions. I don't know that. I want to ask it, but I'm afraid I'm going to offend. I'd rather you offend, learn from it, don't do it again, share your knowledge versus not asking the question and then doing more harm.
Right.
I mean, that's one way.
Yeah, so let's kind of dig in on the practical piece specifically with the speech language pathologist. There's several tests, and we talked about this kind of before when we were discussing this. There's several tests that SLPs can use to diagnose speech and language issues, particularly in children. And you're not the biggest fan of them, and it's related to some of your work. Talk to me a little bit about that and kind of the issues with the tests that are available right now.
Yes. So I'll first say a nice little disclaimer. I am really appreciative of all the work that publishers and people who create these tests go through. I am. I know how much work and research goes into it. But the trick is sometimes when you create a standardized assessment, right? So for SLPs, it's things like our language standardized tests, our articulation standardized tests. But for the regular world, the masses, it's the GRE, it's the ACT, right? So there's standardized tests everywhere. And there's tons of research to show that there's a lot of cultural bias within these standardized tests. Same thing happens within the speech language pathology field. So what happens is, and this is one way I look at it, is who was not at the table when this test was created, right? Who did not have the opportunity to give their voice and say, actually, that vocabulary, it's really mostly found in kind of more white, affluent populations, right? I don't think this is going to go across the board. Or, okay, so you're only going to accept one answer for how to mark plural. Well, I know African American English speakers mark plural through number, not through the S at the end of a word, right? So perhaps we need to make sure that when we're looking at the test, we see how culturally responsive the test is or not. Some of them do a better job than others. Some of them actually will give dialect considerations. Hey, here's the test. Now, if you have a student and they're speaking in a different dialect than the test that's been designed for, make sure you give credit for X, Y, and Z. Some tests don't do that at all. Some tests do it, but it's only for one or two different dialects, right, than the mainstream or general American English dialect. So it's tricky. It's tricky. We have these standardized tests and we want to use them, but they're not always the most culturally responsive tests. And we need to do a better job. And one of the ways to do that is to have different people at the table when the tests are being designed. But in the meantime, I think there are different ways we can use these tests still competently, right? I still think we can use these tests and just realize, okay, got it. In this section, I think this student, because they're an African American English speaker, or because they're a Chicano English speaker, they might answer these questions a little differently. I need to use my cultural competence, the skills, the knowledge, the attitude, the awareness that I've already gained. I need to use that and recognize, you know what? That's a pattern that child's using. That doesn't sound like anything wrong. That sounds like it's a pattern they're using, and it sounds like a pattern they've probably picked up from their home environment.
So you talked before this recording about a student of yours that saw an SLP give one of these tests and marked a difference as a deficiency. So I want you to tell the audience, I think it was such a great story that kind of explains this and shows how kind of being exposed to these things in the classroom allows for our students as they go out to kind of better be able to identify these things. So I'd love for you to kind of tell that story of how this all played together.
Yes, this is funny. I love this story because I tell a lot of stories that are based in language, right? And speech and language differences, grammatical differences, syntax. But this is definitely a difference in a little bit of socioeconomic status, right? And just kind of background knowledge, cultural background knowledge. So I have amazing grad students, love them. And, I talk about this stuff all the time in the classroom, and I make sure they're aware and make sure when you go out there, you are not, marking things wrong that are not wrong. So I had a student come back to me and said, oh my goodness, Dr. Hamilton, I saw this SLP and I'm pretty sure she marked this question incorrectly. So there's a little black boy and he was getting the test, and the SLP asked him the question about, it was a couch. And it was basically what do you do with a couch? And the child responded, you sleep on it. And the SLP marked it wrong. Now, my student came back to me and said, but I don't know. I mean, maybe he sleeps on a couch, right? Maybe he actually at night, he either sleeps on the couch, or maybe the couch is a pull-out and they open it up at night and they pull it out and they sleep on it. I don't think he was wrong. And I wish the SLP would have dug a little deeper to find out, oh, that's interesting. Why did you say you sleep on a couch? Or ask, yes, you're right, you could sleep on a couch. Is there anything else you can do on this couch? Yeah, you can sit and watch TV. So those are some of those, skill sets that we need to be aware of, to be not everyone's experience is the same. That's just what it is. Not everyone's experience is the same, and we're making assumptions that they are, and we're making assumptions that if they don't fit what we think is the quote unquote standard or correct, that it's wrong.
Yeah, so let's dig in there on this concept of identity and speech and how they're interrelated in the experiences that people have outside in the real world, if you will. Kind of talk about how those play together and the way we need to be cognizant of those things and think about that.
Yeah, so I think it's so interesting. No matter how you speak, if you like the way you speak, if you don't like the way you speak, it is a part of your identity. It's part of who you are, and it's part of how you um, walk in this world. It's part of how you communicate in this world, no matter what dialect it is, right? And I always share this story when I was younger. My first dialect is, some people call it mainstream American English, some people call it general American English. We don't call it standard American English anymore. That's one thing I think we all can agree on, but we still can't agree on what to call it. Anyways, we know what it is, right? We know what it is when we hear it. So I grew up speaking that way, and I remember feeling some kind of way, not really comfortable when I would hang out with my cousin and all her black friends. Because the second I opened my mouth, oh, why do you sound white? So even though I was an African American English speaker initially growing up, the way I spoke was part of my identity. And it made me feel um, uncomfortable to know that people thought there was a mismatch between what they expected to see from me versus what came out of my mouth. So there's one example of like this identity connection between speech. But the way I always talk about it in my research, I think about African American English speaking kids. And oftentimes you'll get, very well meaning speech language pathologists and teachers who will want to correct this child. And I'm putting that in quotes. Oh, this video. Hey, you want to correct the way a child is speaking. We don't say axe, we say ask. We don't say bathroom, we say bathroom. Now, the problem with that is if you feel like you're doing a benefit to this child by saying that, you're actually attacking a part of their identity. Because not only is that one, the way they say it, but it's the way they've learned to say it through their own community. So if you tell me that the way I'm saying ASK, axe, is wrong, then now I'm like, oh, my mom says it wrong too. Ooh, my mom doesn't know how to talk. Grandma must not talk right either. My cousin doesn't know how to talk. Wow, no one, wow, we must not know how to talk back home in our family. We must not know how to talk in our neighborhood. That is the identity piece. It's a cultural linguistic identity piece, and it's a very important part. And we sometimes forget about that when we work with children in the classroom.
So I want to get you to kind of explain a little bit, and this may be not necessarily for the teachers and the SLPs that are listening, but for some of the general community. I think there's people that would say, yeah, axe, not ask, is wrong. That's not how you say it. So talk about some of these different flavors. So African American English versus some of the other. What are some of the different types or flavors of language, just to kind of give an understanding and concept of what that might look like?
So here's a great way. So first of all, African American English is definitely what our field calls it: speech language pathology, audiology. People call it Black English. People call it African American language. Maybe people have heard it as Ebonics, but that turned into a big joke and it was just very negative. So that's one flavor. There's Chicano English, there's Philippine English, there's Nigerian Pidgin English, there's Hawaiian Pidgin English, I don't even know, there's so many different ways to speak English. I don't even know the numbers, but it's way in the hundreds, probably thousands. It's a lot. And I always tell people what, 1.5 billion people who speak English? 1.5 billion people. I think that's the stat. If I'm wrong, please, don't say anything. But it's a huge number of people who speak English. How dare us think that the way you speak it is the correct and only way when 1.5 billion people speak English? So a great example for this one, let's take one version of British English. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of British Englishes, right? There's the ones from different regions of Great Britain. They're the ones from different socioeconomic classes of Great Britain, right? Cockney English. But I like to use it because somehow people can wrap their head around it a little better, because let's not do race right now, okay? Because that's what gets people very confused, the race piece. No one wants to say it, but people get confused because of it. If I were to say the word schedule in a general American English rules, I say schedule. The SCH is a SK sound. Okay? But if I were to say it in Great Britain, we would say schedule. The SCH is now an SH sound. Shh. Different rules, different dialects. But somehow when the rules change and it's a certain community of people using different rules, now we have a problem with the way that they have used the rules, right? I don't know many of us who go to Great Britain and say, oh, you don't say privacy, you don't say privacy, you say privacy. You don't say schedule, you say schedule. No, that's how they speak it. That's their dialect. But when it crosses over marginalized identities such as race, geographic location, socioeconomic status, then all of a sudden we want to say those rules are the wrong rules.
I love that you mentioned the difference in versions of English, whether it's British English or things that are commonly spoken over here. I was just having a conversation with my father-in-law, who lived in Canada for a period while he was younger in elementary school, and there's different ways of spelling the same English word, adding U's in places, and it was the same thing, continuously marking it wrong. And his mom was like, "No, we're only here for 3 years. I'm not teaching my kid to, to spell it like that. This is how we speak and how we say things."
Yes.
And it's so true. It's different based on where people grew up, where they came from. And so I love that you brought out that point. I think it makes it super, super clear to be able to understand that difference.
Yeah, and I want to just extend upon this really quickly because I did something one of my workshops and I really thought it hit home for what how this manifests in the classroom. So I appreciate, here's the masses, here we go. But now let's look at how this can manifest in the classroom. So I had an individual, she was part of my workshop participants, and I had a, text written up on the slide. And I was like, please read the text. She was like, okay. I was like, you must know who I am because I like to, make my participants slightly uncomfortable, just enough so that you're growing. So she's reading the text and she says the word schedule, and I correct her. I say, oh, no, no, it's schedule. She's like, okay. And she keeps reading. And she says privacy. I say, no, 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 privacy. She's like, okay. And this happens for a while until she catches on and she starts trying to use the Great Britain rules, right? Great Britain, British English rules. And what everyone started to understand was, whoa, why were you stopping her? She knew what she was saying. She was comprehending what she was saying in her own code. But now you're marking her wrong because she's not using your code. But she was still right. Do you
Yep,
see what I'm
I think
saying?
that's a great example. I love that. And you've done a lot of these trainings, so I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to put at the end of the show, actually, and in the show notes, I'll link to your website because you've got tons of great resources. But you've spoken all over the country about this. Some of the biggest school districts in the country have had you in to discuss this topic and really help improve what they're doing. So, what do you tell a teacher or a speech language pathologist? What can one person do to begin making that difference in the spaces that they're in each day?
I think one of the first things we can do is really just become aware that all the kids in front of you have their own lived experiences. And more than likely, if you're working with someone who doesn't look or sound like you and has a different cultural linguistic background than you, then you may not be aware of what their norms are, what their cultural norms are, what their traditions are, what their values are. So get to know that. Get to know it so that you don't think it's wrong, so that you start to recognize it's just different, right? Start to recognize cultural linguistic differences as just that, differences. And I think what's so important to understand, I get so frustrated sometimes when we use the word different because there's this underlying assumption of different from the quote unquote norm, standard, mainstream, you fill in the blank. But I'm like, no, it's all different. It's you're different too, right? Hey teacher, you're different, right? You're not normal, you're not just regular. I even talk to teachers about just understanding their own cultural background. Like I always have pictures of, this is what I do. I always have pictures of, we all have a culture. We need to understand what our culture, who our called, what our cultural backgrounds are. And then I have pictures of two white women, and I say these two white women have different cultures, right? When I ask, oftentimes white people about their culture, they say, "Oh, it's just regular. Oh, it's just normal. I don't really have a culture." And I'm like, no, you do. And you have to have one. Because if your culture is regular and my culture is different from yours, am I irregular? And I don't think I am. So I think one of the first things they can do is just make that recognition like, okay, the students in front of me, they have a different cultural linguistic background than I do. What does that mean? That means that they're going to say words I may not be familiar with. Let me familiarize myself with those words. They're going to use rules of grammar that I may not be familiar with. I'm going to understand what those grammatical rules are. They're going to have different traditions and values. They're going to communicate differently. So often, I talk about this in one of my papers too, volume and verb. So often, you'll have like a black kid in the classroom who just likes to move. They just like to move. They engage in a different way. And instead of looking at that engagement as disruption, look at that engagement as what it is, which is engagement. I think the first step is really to take a step back and not look at what's missing, look at what's there and how rich it already is.
I love that. So let's take this broader scale. Let's look at this systemically. What needs to change at a school district or at the national level or in a college classroom to better help students? If you can wave your magic wand and make these things better that need to change, what are those things going to be?
Brandon, so I often talk about my pre-revolution responses and my post-revolution responses. Pre-revolution response, recognize that the assessments are written in mainstream general American English. They are warranted. The responses that students are being asked to respond in, be it in written form or oral form, or is mainstream general American English. So that's not changing anytime soon, right? It's not like we're going to start having some of these tests written in African American English. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So a pre-revolution stance for me would be start really paying attention to how you are, and this is school districts, how you are assessing, how you are teaching literacy. Lots of children, African American English children in particular, but also Chicano English, Philippine English, they are coming to school 5-10 steps below someone who already speaks the oral language of the classroom. They don't speak the oral language of the classroom, more than likely, right? They speak another code. So they come into school and they're missing a step. There's a step missing, but we're forgetting they're missing a step. And then we're diving in and we're going to try and teach them literacy. And lo and behold, whoa, that's weird. The lowest reading group are all the Black kids or the Hispanic kids or the kids with speech and language. That's weird that they're all the lowest reading group. Recognize when there's a pattern that seems to be a culturally biased pattern. Recognize and do some research and go, okay, what did we do? Did we assess wrong? Did we not take into consideration X, Y, and Z? So pre-revolution stance is we really need to realize that just as English language learners are learning English, right? African American English speakers, Chicano, they're learning how to speak the general American English dialect, which is a different code. They don't have that at home. So recognize that before you go into teaching things such as literacy, right? I always get frustrated when people say things like, oh, African American English children have a harder time learning how to read or write. No. Perhaps harder time learning how to read or write in a code they don't speak. That's like someone saying, and it's pretty, a little bit, broader, but I speak French. I don't know how to read Swedish. Well, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Right? I speak AAE. I don't know how to read in general American English. I can learn, but teachers need to be intentional. Districts need to be intentional with the way they are assessing because the trajectory is low. So many African American children are performing lower than their white peers on reading assessments. That hasn't changed in decades. Why? School districts take time to look at, and I don't think language is all, this is the only thing. I know that there's disciplinary infractions too, but there is a language piece that we don't look at when it comes to these large assessments that we're doing that dictates the trajectory of these children. And so I do think that we can do a better job of taking a look and being like, okay, the numbers are there. There's huge discrepancy. There's huge disproportionality. There's huge disparities. Why? Stop accepting that and let's figure out why. That's pre-revolution stance. Post-revolution stance? Can we all just speak the way we want to speak and everybody be okay? Like, can we stop judging people on so many different things that are just part of who we are? Can we just stop doing that? Can we all just be who we want to be and just stop that?
I love that. And I love that you're able to go in and have these conversations at a large scale with these different districts. And, I just want to thank you so much for taking your time joining us on this podcast. Your research is so consequential. And I really look forward to seeing how our listeners can implement these insights and create a more culturally competent, compassionate, and really a more effective communication environment. And this is far from the end of this discussion. I don't want anyone to think just because we've hit the end of this podcast that this is over. And it really barely scratches the surface. So I want to encourage all of our listeners, if you're a teacher and you want resources, I've got a link in the show notes to Megan-Brette's website. She has tons of podcast episodes, downloads, books, you name it, she's got it. That can help you dig deeper on this. And for all of our listeners, before you click out and go visit her website, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified each time one of our episodes hits. And be sure to click on that 5-star button. It helps us out more than you know. We'll see you back here next time for the Things You Didn't Know podcast.